Okay, I'm back to reading Genesis 1:1, first verse of the Bible. In my last video, I talked about two different ways that Genesis 1:1 has been read. The first one was, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's a unique act of God. He creates the heaven and the earth. Then you go to verse 2, and verse 2 tells you how the heavens and the earth were. They were without form and void. So God that creates the universe is without form, and then God has to then, in the next 6 days, organize the unformed universe. That's a traditional way of reading Genesis 1:1. And it's a good way. There's nothing wrong with it. And another way to read it is to see verse 1 as not a unique, describing a unique act of creation, but as basic. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is a summary of the next 7 days of creation. It's like the example I gave as an analogy was if I said, yesterday I cleaned up my room. First, I vacuumed. Second, I put my socks in the drawer. When I said yesterday I cleaned up my room, that was a summary of what was going to follow. Yesterday I cleaned up my room, and then what follows is telling you how I cleaned up my room. So a second way of reading Genesis 1:1 is to say, verse 1:1, and this I think is how most biblical commentators now do actually read it. Many commentaries, biblical commentaries will tell you that it's a summary statement. So I'm not making this up. This is how I think that most biblical commentaries now read it. If not most, then many. Okay. Another way to let me give you another way to read Genesis 1:1, and this is, for example, the way the Jewish study Bible, okay, translates Genesis 1:1. Also, it's very similar to the NRSV and to Robert Alter's translation of Genesis. The first 5 books. Robert Alter is a professor of English at UC Berkeley. He's Jewish, and he's translated most of I think maybe by now all of the Hebrew Bible into English. So another way that verse 1:1 is translated is represented by the Jewish Study Bible, which is a scholarly edition. It's written by scholars, biblical scholars, okay? People have spent their whole lives studying the Hebrew Bible. It's the published by the Jewish Publication Society, Oxford University Press. So, okay, here's how the Jewish Study Bible translates Genesis 1:1. Unlike the King James or the Revised Standard, the traditional view that says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which is a independent clause. I mean, that it's an independent clause is basically a statement that can stand by itself. Okay? It's an independent clause. It's a complete statement. The Jewish Study Bible translates verse 1 as a dependent clause, meaning it cannot stand by itself. Something has to follow. If I say, for example, today I went to the beach, that's an independent clause. That's stop. You stop. That's a complete statement. If I say, when today I went to the beach, okay, that's a dependent clause because you can't stop at that point. When I went to the beach, you want to hear what happened, right? That's a dependent clause. The Jewish Study Bible translates Genesis 1:1 not in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but it begins with when. When God began to create heaven and earth. Wow, okay, that's a totally different. Now you can't stop there. Like in the King James Version, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, period. You stop. You can take it as a unique act or as a summary of what follows, but you can stop. But when you start out, when God began to create heaven and earth, you can't stop there. Okay, and this is also a legitimate way to interpret the Hebrew. Okay, now Hebrew scholars, some Hebrew scholars will say this is the only correct way. Other Hebrew scholars will say it is a correct way, but the other one makes just as much sense. So you cannot determine from the Bible itself or the Scriptures itself what is the correct way to do it. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I'm just taking the words of the Hebrew scholars. Joel Baden, for example, is a Hebrew scholar, teaches at Yale, and he says that both you can take it as a dependent clause or as an independent clause, and both translations can be justified by the original Hebrew. Anyway, the Jewish Study Bible says, here's how it translates. Since it starts with a when, verse was a when, you have to go on to verse 2 and 3. So let me read all three verses. Verse 1 says, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, let there be light, and there was light. So verse 1 cannot stand by itself. It has to go with the other two verses. Verse 1 is a dependent clause. Again, I'll read it again. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void. So in this translation, God is not creating ex nihilo out of nothingness, because when God began to create, there's already something there. The earth was unformed and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. So when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. Okay, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. So for the Jewish Study Bible, verses 1 to 3 are a complete statement. Verse 1 is a dependent clause. The independent clause that it's leading towards is God said, let there be light, and there was light. So for this translation, the first three verses describe what happened on the first day of creation. So it starts out, when God began to create heaven and earth. So it doesn't say God created the heavens and earth. When he began creating, there was already something there. The earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, let there be light, and there was light. That's the Jewish Study Bible. Let me read let me see here. This is the New Revised Standard Version. It's very similar to what I just read, and it also starts out. It doesn't start with when. It starts out in the beginning, but then it has a when. So this is New Revised Standard Version, which is a very popular and scholarly translation of the Bible into English. In the beginning, this is NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. And then it puts the period there. So the NRSV puts the first two verses as a complete statement. Unlike what I just read from the Jewish Study Bible, which had the first three verses as a... So for the NRSV, the first complete statement is, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, how was the earth when he did this? Okay, the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the wind from God swept over the waters. That's a complete statement. And then it goes to the third verse. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. So, again, verse 1 is a dependent clause. And let me read one more. This is from Robert Alter, who, I guess he's emeritus now. He's not teaching at Berkeley anymore. But when I was at Berkeley, Robert Alter was teaching there. In fact, he was on my dissertation committee. My dissertation was on Great Expectations by Dickens. But anyway, Robert Alter was on my examination committee, whatever, examining me for the PhD. Okay, here's how Robert Alter translates Genesis 1:1. When he begins again, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth then was welter and waste, and darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering over the waters. God said, let there be light, and there was light. So, many scholars, Robert Alter is one of them, the Jewish Study Bible agrees, and then the NRSV, they translate Genesis 1:1 as a dependent clause, when, with a few variations, but basically it's when God began to create. They begin with a when clause. So they don't see verse 1:1 as God created the heavens and the earth, period, right? It's when God began to create the heavens and the earth was without form and void. So it's not creation. Creation of this universe is not ex nihilo. Now, that doesn't mean that the formless void existed eternally. The Bible doesn't say anything about that. It's just saying maybe God did. Genesis 1:1 doesn't say anything about that, according to this view. So when I say, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was... I'm not denying creation ex nihilo. As a Christian, I do believe in it. God created out of the universe out of nothing. According to this view, though, God, first of all, Genesis 1:1 doesn't say anything about the formless void. It just says the universe was, when God began to create the heavens and the earth, it was a formless void. So well, now we have three different interpretations of Genesis 1:1. To me, I find this very fascinating personally. Some people might say, "Whoa, what do you believe? I mean, the Bible's not clear. Well, how can you believe anything?" No, you don't. We don't determine what the Bible is, how it must be. We deal with what it is. And to me, the Bible is a very rich book. And so just to always look for the one meaning that it has, to me that's nonsense. Genesis 1:1 is a good example of the Hebrew can be taken and different translations will give you different interpretations of verse 1 and how verse 1 and 2 and 3 fit together. I'll continue this in part 3 because I still have more to say about Genesis 1:1. So part 3 I will say a little more about Genesis 1:1. I will stop at this point.